Hello everyone, this is Michael, and this is the introduction to the Grid Overlay plugin for Unity. This plugin is designed for anyone who is looking to lay a grid over terrain and have it contour to the terrain. So allow me to show you the Grid Overlay example. This is included in the package, and this shows just how easy it is to get set up. Now, the way you implement it is going to depend on what you're attaching the grid to. So as you can see here, there's a really basic scene. We've got some terrain, some hills, and really the only other object here is what I've called test grid. This would be your building. So for me, I have a character controller and a script called test grid move. These are just custom for this purpose. You're welcome to use them, the test grid move, but really it's just a basic way to move the object around. You will have your own way to do that, however you're doing that in your game. But so this represents, test grid represents whatever building you've got or whatever it is that you want to attach the grid to. And so all I have done is add the grid overlay script to that object, and let's go down some of the variables. So size X and size Z, this is just the size of your grid. And so based on how big your building is, you will set that. The step is how big you want the squares to be that make up your grid. So the bigger the step, the larger the boxes of your grid, and the smaller number of boxes. And so height adjust is, this is how far off the ground we are going to draw the grid. And we do need a little bit of a buffer, because if it's too low, the grid will still clip the terrain. And so just a slight little buffer is what we've got here. I've got a 2, you can use a 1, you can use a 5, whatever works for you. Just play around with that number. For me, 1 or 2 usually works. Line width, again, this is totally based on your preference. I've got 0.3, make it whatever you want to have there. Terrain is your terrain. That's the terrain that we want to contour to. Now, if that is left blank, it will still work. You will just simply get a flat grid, and it will lay flat on the terrain. It will intersect just like it normally does. Line material. This is any material, whatever you want your lines to look like. You can use any material. You can use whatever shaders you want. I have included a very, very basic material, but you, of course, you are welcome to use whatever you want. Now, init grid. If you are adding a grid to an object in the editor before runtime, you're going to want init grid on. If you are adding a grid at runtime through script, then you're going to want to call init grid from your script. And if you take a look at the grid overlay script, you'll see what I'm talking about. But basically, right now we're going to want that checked. Center grid, that just centers the grid on our object. Usually you're going to want that on. Conflict is a variable that your scripts can interact with to determine whether or not, when they determine that a conflict exists, then they're going to want to tell the grid a conflict exists. And then when there is not a conflict, you're going to want your script to let it know that it's not. So at any rate, let's take a look. And there we have a nice giant grid. And as you can see, this is contoured to the terrain. Now, conflict is right here. This is where we're going to set that to true, and bam. So typically what we would have is, your players moving their building along, and bam, nope, can't build there. They move it back, and that's it. And so that the conflict AI is something in this basic mode that you're going to have to handle yourself, because again, there's so many different ways to do that. But the ability is there to let the grid know, hey, there's a conflict, and so you should go to red, and then when it's not, then you turn it back. So that's it. So all really you've got to do is take your building, put the grid overlay script on it, put a few variables in here, and you are ready to go with a grid that will overlay on terrain.